Who is Little Miss X anyway? Little Miss X, also abbreviated to LMX, is a Jane Doe that I've talked about in previous videos, though I have had yet to ever dedicate a video solely to her, herself. On Halloween of 1958, October 31st, 1958, a girl's remains were discovered about 10 miles southeast of the Grand Canyon. The clothing found near the body appeared to be too big for the victim, with them, the clothes I believe, being located not long after the remains were found. On November 3rd, 1958, the Arizona Daily Sun posted an article titled "Skeleton Found, Second Spotted." It stated that the Coconino County authorities that Monday had started an investigation to identify a skeleton that was found by deer hunters south of the Grand Canyon on the Moqui district of the Kaibab National Forest. Sheriff Cecil Richardson said the skeleton was believed to be the remains of a white male about 20 years old. The sheriff said the teeth and jawbones were well preserved, and they were trying to have a mold made in hopes to help with identification. There were several fillings still in the teeth. Sheriff Richardson reported that a search would have been conducted that Wednesday to find another skeleton, which hunters had reported they found in the Grand Canyon area. Besides the second skeleton, Richardson said that a saddle was also found. The sheriff said a search was delayed until the hunters could get time off to aid the deputies. The skeleton, which Richardson picked up Sunday, was found by Tim Hatchett, 15 at the time, of Yuma, who was hunting with his father, Samuel. Richardson said the two reported their find to Yavapai County deputy at Yarnell. The deputy returned the two to Williams, where they led Coconino officers to the scene. The bones were found on top of a thick mat of pine needles near the Skinner Ridge Road south of the area. On November 6, 1958, the Arizona Daily Sun posted an article titled "Second Skeleton Believed Old Indian Grave." J.A. Myers and I.C. McAllister, hunters, led the officers to the site where they noticed the skeleton late the prior week. Richardson said they not only found the skeleton of an Indian adult, but also the skeleton of his horse and his saddle and gun. There was no question that it was a burial site, and, to quote, "We did no more than pile more rocks over the site." The sheriff also said that he was making some progression on an attempt to identify another skeleton found in the area over that weekend. Richardson said that he had some leads he was going to check out to help identify this person, who was believed to be a girl in her teens at the time of death. There was a nail file that was speculated to have been possibly owned by Pinky Redmond, who was a girl I've talked about before on my channel, who disappeared from California in March of 1958 along with her boyfriend. Their car, though, was found in Williams, Arizona. Pinky was later excluded from the case, though this was before DNA testing. LMX was also believed in some cases to have been Mary Margaret Begay, another person I've talked about in the past, but she was excluded also. Mary Begay had disappeared a little over a year before LMX's remains were found, but once again Mary Margaret Begay was excluded before DNA testing. Another girl who has been thought to have been LMX is Connie Smith, another person I've talked about on my channel in the past, a 12-year-old girl who went missing in 1952 from Camp Sloan, Connecticut. She was ruled out also before DNA testing, though Connie's older brother fervently believed that LMX was her. When doing my research on Connie Smith, one source stated that LMX was found about 6 miles off the road on Skinner Ridge by a father and son duo. Samuel E. Hanchetta and his son Timothy were hunting when they found LMX's skeleton. Parts of the hands, feet, arm, and leg bones were missing, and I assume that this was due to wildlife encountering the remains first. A likeness was made from the skull, and a clay facial sculpture was created. I don't believe there's any pictures, at least at the time of recording this, of the clay facial sculpture. Little Miss X is believed to have been Mexican, Native American, or Mexican and white. She was anywhere from 13 to 17 years old, 5 feet tall to potentially 5'3", 110 pounds, with dark brown hair, bleached to light brown, and she had 7 silver amalgam fillings in 4 teeth. Under Sheriff Deputy Cole of the LMX area drove to the Smith Ranch in Wyoming to meet with Connie Smith's dentist, who was unable to identify the remains as Connie Smith through the jaw and teeth alone. From the ranch, Deputy Cole drove to Denver for further forensic doctors to still not be able to positively identify the remains as Connie Smith. The remains were returned to Arizona, and the sheriff of that time was later defeated in another election, and so that sheriff and deputy were replaced, and at that point, LMX's remains became unknown. The main problem with those who have been excluded, so to speak, as matches is that they were done before DNA testing of today came around. So people like Connie Smith, Donis Redman, and Mary Margaret Begay never had a DNA analysis because no one knows where LMX is buried. And so we don't have any DNA to compare her to anyone. The few tries to compare her DNA in the past were fruitless because LMX's DNA didn't have enough material, at least back then during that time period, to be tested. Back in the mid-century time period, most bodies were identified through dental comparisons. A good example of this would be the victims of John Wayne Gacy. Many of those boys and young men were initially identified by the dental records that were left behind. Even Timothy McCoy actually was later identified with dentals 8 years after he was found under John Wayne Gacy's crawl space. In January of 2023, when I actually first started writing this, there hadn't been any DNA exclusions to LMX listed on NamUs. And as of July 2024, when I came back to this, there were still no exclusions to LMX's case. And in November of 2024, there are still no exclusions to her case. So, of course, one major factor of this is because LMX was buried at the Citizen Cemetery in Flagstaff, Arizona, though rumors say it was in an unmarked grave. This lack of knowledge on her location is why we haven't gotten any proper genetic testing done to exclude her from the previously excluded girls. In my eyes, we cannot rule out Connie Smith, Mary Begay, or Donis Redman since we don't have the DNA telling us so. I'm unsure what testing would be done exactly if her remains were found. I don't work in a forensic lab, unfortunately, but I have heard that mitochondrial DNA testing might help identify remains as old as LMX's case. In my write-up on Donis Redman, I had mentioned that other potential girls that could have been LMX would have been Grace Golden, Yolanda Torriguez Villagomez, and I did a search for both on NamUs at the time, though I didn't see either girl on those websites. And the same was true when I looked on the Doe Network. And so, first looking at Yolanda Torriguez, there was a 1956 bulletin from the FBI in July 1956 about Yolanda Torriguez, who was listed as a missing person. She'd been missing since April 23rd, 1955, from Chicago, Illinois. At the time, she was 18 years old, born on November 9th, 1937. She was 5 feet tall, 120 pounds, with dark brown hair and brown eyes. She's stated to have occasionally worn glasses and had a light burn scar on her chest. Yolanda had a small birthmark in the middle of her chin, pierced ears, and was stated to close her eyes when she laughed. Yolanda was listed as white by the FBI. Her relatives listed was only her mother, Mrs. Antonia Villagomez, who lived at 8811 Houston Avenue in Chicago. Beyond that, there's virtually no other info out there on Yolanda, and I'm not sure whatever officially came of her case, whether she was found or not, or if her family stopped trying. I tried to look into the newspaper archives, but I didn't find anything on Yolanda Villagomez from 1955 to 1958. There's mentions of a woman with the same name in newspapers from 1959 in South Dakota, Texas, and California, but none seem to have been her. The same seems to be true of using the Torriguez last name. I couldn't find any results from 1955 to 2023. There were more results with Villagomez, but nothing stood out as being a match or a lead for her. The most I really could find was a 1998 article where Yolanda Villagomez had owned a bridal shop and also specialized in quinceañeras. What was really interesting is that this Yolanda lived in Chicago Heights and mentioned that she had gotten married at the age of 18. Now, her age was not listed in this article. Granted, if she was married, then Villagomez could have potentially been her married name, so I'm not sure if this was the same person entirely. But I ended up searching a Find a Grave, looking for any person with the same name on Find a Grave, and there were no matches to her name. If the woman from the 1998 article was our Yolanda, then she would have been 61 at that time in 1998. I personally thought that they looked similar enough in the pictures I saw. In a 1950 census record, her parents were listed as Jesus and Antonia, who were 45 and 29 years old at that time. Their last name was also spelled with an A, making it a Villagomez. But Yolanda was the oldest, 12 at the time. Then she had two younger siblings, Hermelinda, 7, and Gloria, 6. The girls were born in Illinois, their mother, Colorado, and their father in Mexico. Their father was proprietor for a grocery store, with their mother as a sales lady. Jesus was born in 1905, and their mother, Antonia, was born in 1921. Their father didn't seem to appear on Find a Grave either. There is a record from July 25th, 1990, that states that Jesus passed away at the age of 85, widowed. He was born on June 15th, 1905, and it states that he is buried at Maryhill Cemetery, Illinois. There's a record from 1989 stating that Antonia passed away and was buried on November 4th, 1989. She's buried at St. Mary Cemetery at Evergreen Park, Illinois. She was 68 years old. I think that with all that info, Yolanda is still alive, or at least very much so, when Little Miss X was found in 1958. And so that leaves us with at least 3 other girls, if not more, that could still be her. When I looked at Google Maps, the address listed for Yolanda in the FBI brochure isn't very far from the dress boutique from that article I found, dated in 1998. This leads me to believe that this was very likely the same woman who went missing at the age of 18, got married at 19, and I guess you could say lived happily ever after. Another person that I have seen mentioned around, I believe initially I had seen mentioned was on Reddit, is the case of Grace Golden, where there was little information on Yolanda Torrigues Villagomez. There is almost, if nothing, on Grace Golden. I had read her name in passing while researching Connie Smith and actually Donis Redmond's case. Grace's case is not on NamUs or the Doe Network. And there was a post, as I wrote down, there was a post on Reddit that mentioned her on the Grateful Doe subreddit. But the info is just one sentence, and a Facebook link that for me, when I clicked on it, didn't work anymore. Thankfully, SimsGuy67 linked the Facebook page where a 1955 FBI missing persons brochure was posted. It states that Grace Golden was 14 years old, white, born on December 30th, 1940, in Denver, Colorado. She was 5 feet tall, 104 pounds, with brunette hair, hazel eyes, and an olive complexion. Her parents were Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin L. Golden, who lived at 3400 Quay Street, Wheat Ridge, Colorado. Grace had been missing since June 4th, 1955, from home. The FBI brochure seems to have been dated from September 1955. There doesn't seem to be a Find a Grave page for her, nor any family info on Family Search. I did find a 1950 census record that estimated her to have been born in 1941, and so I do believe that this seems to have been her. This record was dated April 13th, 1950, and it lists her parents as Benjamin and Frances Golden. Ben was 39 years old, so I assume that he was born about 1911 or 1912, and Frances was 33, so she may have been born about 1917 or 18. Benjamin was born in North Dakota, but the census record was taken in Lakewood, Jefferson County, Colorado. The line of work he was in is a bit hard to read when I was going through that census record, though it looks like he did some sort of mechanical or electrical work. Frances didn't work during this time, and her and Grace were born in New York, and Grace's 2 younger brothers were born in Colorado. Frederick L. Golden was 6 years old, and Leslie S., or Leslie G., was 4 years old at the time. The census taker made some errors on the line after Leslie's name, so I wonder if that might be why Grace was listed as having been born in New York and not Colorado, like the FBI brochure said. It seems, though, that Leslie was born on May 5th, 1945 or 46, and Fred was born around 1944, on what might have been January 1st. In a 1930 census record, Benjamin Golden was 19 years old and in the U.S. Marines. The record was taken at Pearl Harbor Naval Reserve in Honolulu, Hawaii. He's listed as having been born in South Dakota this time, with his mother having been born there also. His father is listed as having been born in Missouri. A census record from April 9th, 1940, shows that Benjamin and Frances, who were 29 and 23 at the time, were married, and Ben was a machinist. This record states that both Frances and Benjamin were born in New York. This record was done in Brooklyn, New York. I found the draft card to Ben, where it states that he was born on April 19th, 1910, in Hettinger, North Dakota. The person who will always know your address is listed as Mrs. Frances Golden at 246 Cornelia Street, Brooklyn, New York. And this was the connection that I actually really needed to connect him with his Find a Grave profile to prove that it was really him. On Find a Grave, Benjamin L. Golden is listed as dying on March 17th, 1979 at 68 years old. He's buried at Little Rock National Cemetery in Little Rock, Arkansas. I couldn't seem to find a profile for Frances on Find a Grave, though I am unsure if she had passed away when at least I originally wrote this in 2023. Looking through the newspapers, I couldn't find anything on Grace Golden, starting my search from 1955 to 2023. Nothing, seriously nothing. And absolutely nothing about a missing girl. I wonder what the circumstances of her disappearance were, and if it was similar to Yolanda's, where she ran off to get married. Out of all the cases of missing people I've looked at so far, to me this one was among the most confusing. Since honestly, I'm not really sure if she went missing to begin with. I don't know anything about her family, really, and the info I could find pretty much just went to dead ends. There's a possibility that she may still be alive, and if she would be 83 years old. Her brothers may be alive also, though they didn't have much information out there. So, is there a possibility that Grace Golden is Little Miss X? It wouldn't really answer how she got to Arizona, and with who, and what were the initial items. For someone that went missing in Colorado, I'm not even sure if they were ever found. On one hand, there's missing people who aren't entered into databases like NamUs and the Doe Network, yet show up in other places like state websites and the Charlie Project. And I hate to say this, but I wonder if we could even consider Grace missing at all. Honestly, it's hard to know who may or may not have been a good match to be LMX. Since her body has been missing for years, literally decades, we don't have any genetic testing to confirm or deny any case. In my opinion, we can't exclude anyone until we have the possibility to test DNA. Even if we have the dental paperwork that may have existed when she was initially found, that's not enough to truly exclude any of these missing women, as not every missing person may have dental records to compare to. I say that thinking of the victims once again of John Wayne Gacy, where one boy was difficult to identify because his dentist had retired and destroyed the records. So I believe that story I'm thinking of might have been Timothy McCoy, but this story, that type of story, is applicable to cases even beyond this. I'm unsure how accurate the racial profiling of LMX is, too. Of course, we don't know where her body is, so once again, we can't do testing to differentiate. Just to do modern testing in general, we just don't have that availability, and I wish we did. I'm also curious, though, how accurate a test can identify someone's race when socially a person may be different from what their DNA says. What qualities make someone white, black, or Native American? One source, I believe, from Mary Begay stated that LMX was definitely not Native American. Then another source states that it was actually possibly so. The Doe Network lists LMX as white and /or Hispanic, but in some parts of the U.S., some people consider Hispanic to be white too. So I believe this is all just a lot more estimating, obviously, than what people may believe to be an exact science. Of course, all these missing women can't be LMX, but until she's identified, I am keeping my mind open to the possibility that one of them might be. There is a thread on the Grateful Doe subreddit about 2019 or 2020 that tossed a few names around when it came to the identity of LMX. Two of these names included Avis Marie Hardman and Joan Gay Croft. Avis doesn't appear in NamUs, but Joan does. I'm unsure if Joan could be a match, though, as having been a kidnapping victim, you just kind of don't know. First off would be Joan Gay Croft. Now, Joan Gay Croft was born on April 10th, 1947, from Woodward, Oklahoma. She was 4 years old at the time, though NamUs lists her age as 3 to 5. Joan was white, with strawberry blonde hair, blue eyes, with a fair complexion and chunky build. She was 3'5", 42 pounds, white with 3 faint scars on her forehead, a chickenpox scar on her forearms, if not just one, and her left calf had a splinter wound from the tornado that occurred before she went missing. Joan was last seen wearing pajamas. The story behind Joan's disappearance is a part of one of the most dangerous tornadoes to have hit Oklahoma, which was in April of 1957. In Woodward, Oklahoma, a tornado killed 185 people, left more than 1,000 injured, and hundreds of homes and businesses destroyed. News articles from that day are completely covered in stories about the natural disaster. One place called the Oasis Restaurant was stripped by the storm, and a picture in the Enid Daily Eagle shows the exposed remnants of the restaurant where 3 chairs at the diner remained. There were 20 people at the building during the tornado, though thankfully none of them were killed, but several were severely injured. 9 doctors and 7 nurses from Wichita flew over to assist in caring for the victims. The plane carried 1,881 pounds of whole blood and other medical supplies. A truck was loaded with 200 cots, 800 blankets, and medical supplies. Many of the injured were taken to the capital of Oklahoma City, and the University Hospital treated about 8 or 9 of the seriously injured. St. Anthony's Hospital received 2 cases, one suffering from a serious head injury. At the time of the article, on April 10, 1947, it stated that 3 of the ambulances sent by Oklahoma City General Hospital still hadn't returned. An additional 10 ambulances were requested by the Woodward Red Cross. The tornado seemed to have started around Woodward, then made its way to the Texas Panhandle, where news reports of deaths in the Panhandle were cited. In the small town of Higgins, Texas, all but one building was destroyed, a schoolhouse. Looking through the articles that I had clipped, there were just lists and lists of people that had went missing or were presumed dead, or even just lists of people that were found dead. In Woodward, the most devastated area was the residential district, with a small portion of the business section hit. This was reported to be the first tornado to hit Woodward. The hardest hit area was Highland Park, and many of the injured were taken to nearby towns, including Oklahoma City, which was 14 miles away. A fire burned one industrial block, and there was no water to pump and fight it because the water was electronically pumped by the city, and of course the power was taken out. At the time, which was April 10th, there was only a few of the dead identified. Many of the bodies had been disfigured, and there wasn't any water to wash them either. Streams of sorrowing relatives walked through the morgues. A car moved through the streets broadcasting pleas for blood donors to go to hospitals, and emergency hospitals were set up to aid the Woodward Memorial Hospital with an emergency call set out to Oklahoma City for more doctors, especially those that specialized in fractures. 10 additional ambulances were sent from OKC and Guthrie. The tornado was so bad that 1/4 of the population had no housing. The sheriff's office and highway patrol set up guards in the downtown area after some of the stores were reported to have been looted. The entire west end of Woodward was shattered, and the north side was ripped apart. Fire had broken out, and the city was apparently ablaze for an hour. Fire departments from nearby towns had to arrive in order to bring it under control. Then, on top of all of that, there was a torrential rain, which at least helped extinguish the fire. One article had listed that an Irving Walker, who was 67 years old at the time, was a night engineer at the Oklahoma Gas and Electric Company plant. He was killed at the start of his shift. Emergency generators were used at the hospitals. All fracture cases were sent to Oklahoma City. Many of the streets were lined with debris, and cars were apparently rolled into knots by the storm as if they were pieces of tinfoil between one's fingers. A Mrs. Long was killed along with one of her children. A 14-month-old Judith Ann Long was injured, with the father and 3 other children unaccounted for. The Electra Chuck Wagon Gang left from Electra, Texas, and served food for 2,000 people. A Mrs. Allen Croft was identified as dead. Like I said before, there were just lists in the newspapers, lists of missing and identified deceased people after this horrific storm, horrific tornado. In Higgins, Texas, which was close by, many of the injured were sent to Shattuck, Oklahoma, where the 50 hospital beds were jammed with overflow. And then there were 26 people identified dead in Canadian, Texas. The missing and believed dead were also listed in the newspapers. Glacier, Texas, was considered a shattered and smoking ruin, and the population of the town at that time was only 140 people. Highway patrolmen who arrived at that scene early on said that many of the town's businesses and buildings and homes in general caught on fire. The injured and dead were rushed to the hospitals in nearby Canadian and Pampa, and 17 had been identified as dead by mid-morning of the 10th, and 8 others were missing, feared dead. The Stillwater News Press reported that there were over 300 hurt at Woodward, and 3,500 people were homeless. Hundreds of Woodward residents were unaccounted for during the general confusion, but were not officially listed as missing. Most were believed to have been in hospitals in the surrounding communities, or had been given shelter in homes that escaped the brunt of the storm. There were grieving and dazed relatives that dug into the debris after the storm just with their fingers alone. And there were others that used sticks to pry apart the wreckage of splintered homes. The Red Cross disaster relief officials worried that the death toll in Woodward alone might reach 100. They said many of the injured were in critical condition and may die. Hospitals in Woodward and half a dozen other cities and towns of northwest Oklahoma were unable to care for the injured. By 7 a.m. on April 10th, 2 ambulance loads of the injured reached hospitals at Oklahoma City. Because the injured were so widely scattered, it was believed that it could be 2 weeks or more before the final damage or final casualty list could be compiled. A hero of the tragedy, as listed in one article, was a man called L.L. Orrell of Woodward, who was a wire chief of the Southwestern Bell Telephone Co. His home blew away, and while he and his family members huddled in the basement, After the storm's suction cup had passed, Oral ran to the edge of the town, climbed a telephone pole, and held together the end of a broken line in order to let the outside world know of the tragedy that came to the isolated community. This was also during the torrential rain and an electrical storm, where his company ended up saying later that he risked his life to make that call. Overall, though, the disaster had happened so fast that many people in the path of it didn't have the time to run to their storm cellars. There was an emergency line that was strung up at 8:30 a.m. on April 10th, which reestablished some communication with Woodward and the outside world. Citizens of the storm reported that it had struck at 9 p.m. or a little after on April 9th. But the big clock at the Baker Hotel, which was a landmark in Woodward, stopped at 8:42 p.m. 3 churches were holding meetings when it struck, and 15 parishioners at the United Brethren Church knelt between the pews and escaped injury as the building collapsed around them. Deacons of the Woodward Baptist Church were in session, but were unhurt as the structure was not badly damaged. St. Peter's Catholic Church was blown away, but no one was reported hurt. The local funeral home quickly overflowed, and temporary morgues were established in the First Christian Church and the community building. Now, as for Joan Croft, the whole point we're even talking about this storm, her cousin, Marvell Parks, remembered the tornado as terrifying, with herself crying and screaming. Joan had a pencil-sized piece of wood driven through her leg. Her mother had been killed. Marvella said the side of the house fell on her, killing her instantly. Joan's father was critically injured and rushed to a hospital in a nearby town. Joan was treated for her leg wound when she and her sister were housed in a Woodward House hospital basement, sleeping on cots. The night after the tornado, 2 people suddenly walked down the stairs into the basement. Marvella remembered that 2 men came by, dressed in khaki shirts and khaki pants. They picked up Joan and carried her out of the basement. Eyewitnesses claim that Joan cried and that she didn't want to leave her sister, but one of the men told her not to worry. They were coming back for her sister. Hospital staff even stopped them, but the men said that they were taking Joan to a different hospital where other family members were waiting, and they were allowed to leave. The family never saw her again. Marvella and other family members theorized that Joan might have been taken to replace a lost daughter that they might have lost. Considering the circumstances of how many people ended up dead and critically injured, I believe the possibility in this theory. It's very possible, since there are articles just listing all of the missing and dead only a day after. There was even an article that reported an infant that was thrown through a window. Joan's disappearance was on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and after it aired, there were many women who called thinking that they could have been Joan. They're looking for their families, Marvella said. They know they are not who they were brought up to be. According to a 2016 article by K4, none of those women were Joan. This article also stated that the state of Oklahoma was working with Marvella, who put a sample of her DNA into the state database and the computer connections to other states. So far, there had only been 3 exclusions to Joan's case that were all from Virginia. The case was, or her profile was created on NamUs on February 5th, 2016. A Medium article by Heather Monroe that's dated October 21st, 2020, states that Joan's mother was named Cleta May Croft, who typically worked as a telephone operator at night. But on the day of the storm, Cleta May was not at work because the National Federation of Telephone Workers were on strike, and on April 9th being their third day of the strike. This strike virtually disconnected telephone access to the entire town. Because of this, city officials didn't receive the advanced warning of the weather coming, and no one was warned to take shelter. Cleta was only 26. The article states that Joan's father was Hutchinson Olencroft, which we've seen mentioned as one of the injured in newspapers. A neighbor had been the one to comb through the rubble of the Croft home, finding Joan and her 7-year-old sister, Jerry. The Medium article states that Jerry had minor injuries from flying debris, and Joan's injury had been described as big as a broom handle. H.O. Croft, as he was referred to in the papers, was admitted to one of the makeshift hospitals at the Baker Hotel. Joan's Aunt Ruth got the word that the girls were orphaned in the tornado. Ruth was the sister of H.O. Croft. She assumed that he had passed away and left to get the girls and adopt them. Eventually, she found out that her brother was alive. The Medium article states that H.O. was listed as dead, but a news clip states that he was among the missing and presumed dead. A man with a similar name, Olin, spelled with an A, was killed in the storm, but this was not H.O. This other person is listed as Olin Leslie Hutchinson. The news article listed Olencroft as the father of Jimmy Hutchinson, and Find a Grave confirms that Olin was the father of Jimmy. But the Olin in the past was listed as the name for Joan's dad, Olencroft. It's been suspected that the men who took Joan away may have planned to demand a ransom from her father, who was relatively wealthy. But no ransom demands were met, or ever sent. There's also speculation that Joan was kidnapped by a child-stealing ring, such as the ones ran by Georgia Tann and Ethel Nation, though none of these have been confirmed. The Unsolved Mysteries episode for Joan aired on September 22nd, 1993. There are sources that state that Jerry was Olin's daughter from another marriage. Then there's ones that state that she was Cleta May's daughter from another marriage. Marvella's DNA was submitted through the CODIS system. When Mary Jane Medlin was found beaten and abandoned in California in 1947, it was speculated that she may have been Joan, but that was later ruled out. Ruth was Marvella's mother. She had found her own mother and brother in the hospital, where soon after, Ruth began to attend to the wounded. There were 3 other girls, approximately 12 years old, 4, and then 8 months old, that were killed in the tornado and never identified. The local mortician asked Ruth to come and examine their bodies to see if any of them were Joan. The 4-year-old apparently looked similar, though apparently after viewing the body, Ruth was certain it was not Joan. The unidentified girls were buried in Woodward Cemetery. It's possible that they might have been from another town and potentially picked up by the tornado and dropped off in Woodward. Joan's family reported her missing, and an extensive search was done. The FBI were even brought in, but there was no trace of her ever found. The identities of the men that took Joan was never known. A nurse confirmed that the men specifically asked for the Croft children. Joan had a lisp and was very shy, and the point was made that she just wouldn't talk to anybody. There was a lead in Arizona that seemed so promising that TV producers paid for a DNA test for Marvella and Joan's younger half-brother to take it. But the test was negative. For some reason that I don't understand, Joan's half-sister Jerry, the last relative known to have seen Joan, declined to take the test. Joan's father died in the 70s, and Joan's siblings were the last and closest blood relatives to her. A woman in South Carolina believed that she may have been Joan. An Oklahoma City woman hired an attorney to help find out if she was Joan. A woman in Missouri thought it could have been her. Then, an Oklahoma City nurse was said to be gathering photographs to send to Marvella as evidence that she was Joan. Calls came from California and elsewhere where women with troubled childhood memories and scarred legs came forward. There was a promising lead where a call from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police led Marvella to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman from Canada. This woman was raised with the first and middle names of Joan Gay. No one was even sure if Joan was still alive. By now, in 2024, many believe that it's likely Joan has probably passed away. In neighborhoods where help was shut out by debris in the streets, injured people were loaded into boxcars to make the trip safely by railroad. The local fire chief compared the night to hell. For a while, it was thought that Joan was taken elsewhere for medical treatment, as the local area was swamped, of course. But none of the hospitals ever listed her as a patient. In 1998, Marvella was noted for regularly visiting the graves of the 3 unidentified girls. That year, she dotted the plots with plastic Easter eggs as well as bright silk flowers. She's quoted as having said, "It's such a mystery. Who are these little girls? Where did they come from? Where are their families? And they can't be forgotten." At the time, Marvella had a good feeling about the Canadian woman being Joan. There were many intriguing parts to her story, such as descriptions and photographs and personal belongings said to bear the names of Joan's parents. The Canadian woman told the newspaper, The Oklahoman, that she no longer had access to the memorabilia, which was said to be the property of the aunt. The lady was apparently seeking legal help to help claim the evidence of her past. One of the items was apparently a charcoal drawing signed O. Croft. In 1993, Olin Croft's widow stated that he liked to work with his hands, and he also liked to draw. Marvella stated that she'd never shared that info with any of the callers claiming to be Joan. Interestingly, the Canadian woman had relatives named Grobel, which was Joan's mother's maiden name. The Canadian woman's family had neighbors named Croft. Supposedly, the Canadian family had their family home swept away by a tornado, though the Oklahoman article pointed out that there were several holes in the story. The Canadian woman's theory is that the family who raised her lost their home in the tornado, looted Joan's home, and kidnapped her with the help of a hospital worker. There's no proof her family was ever in Oklahoma. Marvella is quoted as having said, "I think she's still out there. If this was meant to be, it's gonna happen." Needless to say, Joan is still missing in 2024. Interestingly, the unidentified girls don't seem to be on NamUs or the Doe Network. On Find a Grave, the Elmwood Cemetery in Woodward has 164 people that died in 1947. Not all were from April 9th, the night of the tornado, though some graves only have the year listed and not the day. I wonder, personally, how many of these deaths happened after the tornado, but would still be attributed to it. You know what I mean? With so many people that were rendered homeless, that had to affect their health and their lives in various ways. And for the sake of brevity, I won't read out every name, but I did type it out, and there's probably about 3 pages worth of names of people. 2 of the unidentified girls were buried at the Elmwood Cemetery in Woodward, though neither have any indication which age was which. There are 33 unknown graves in that cemetery, at least listed online, and none of the others have pictures, at least on Find a Grave. Irwin Vincent Walker was apparently working at the OG&E plant, and he's credited with preventing even more deaths when he threw the main switch in the power plant, which cut the electricity to thousands of feet of lines that were either dragging on the ground or blowing wildly in the wind. Apparently, Joan had another half-sister that was named Carol Dawn Croft. This may be the one from a prior marriage that people meant. Carol was born in 1935 to H.O. Croft and Hazel Lennis Blasdell. They divorced at some point, where Carol and her mother ended up on the 1940 census in Buffalo, Oklahoma. H.O. Croft remarried 2 times, which we know to be true. Next was Cleta May, who of course died in the storm. 3 months later, H.O. married again to Irina Madeline Carlton, where they eventually moved to San Antonio, Texas. Apparently, they married on July 2nd, 1947, in Chicago, Illinois. They had 2 more children, Karen and Kendall. H.O. donated his body to science after death, having passed away at the age of 82 on October 30th, 1987. Rena would live until 2008, passing away at the age of 93. It seems that the parent biologically of Jerry, which would have been Cleta May, if I understand correctly. If Jerry had the surname of Croft, this may have been due to stepchildren taking their stepfather's last names back then. If Jerry was not H.O.'s child, then, of course, that begs the question of who was her biological father, and where was he? Was Jerry orphaned by this point, and where did she go, and who was she raised by? I can see a little more clearly why Joan may have been taken to see family if somehow what or the men said was true. Then Joan was being taken to see her father, potentially, while Jerry might have been left behind because she wasn't biologically his. I have no idea, though. This is just speculation. If Jerry had a different father, then it may have been Cleta May's first husband, which was listed as Edwin Ernest Rawls. Rawls was born on May 29th, 1920, in Fort Supply, Oklahoma. On Find a Grave, it says that he and Cleta May married around 1939 in Oklahoma. Assuming he's the dad, they were either pregnant already or were about to get pregnant with Jerry. Seeing that she was 7 in the event of the storm, I assume that she was born in 1940. Through a little digging I did on Family Grave and Family Search, I was able to find Jerry's Find a Grave profile. Geraldine Joyce, or Jerry, Rawls Young was born on September 20th, 1939 in Woodward, Oklahoma. Her parents were actually Edwin Rawls and Cleta May Grable. In 1957, she married Dale J. Young on Christmas Eve. They had 3 daughters, and she was a homemaker, and her husband had a career in the U.S. Air Force. Dale retired in 1987, and they relocated to California, where she spent the rest of her life. On January 13th, 2021, Jerry passed away in Santa Maria, California, at the age of 81. She's buried at Diebold Cemetery in Arnett, Oklahoma, with her husband. Interestingly, Jerry's obituary lists that she was preceded in death by her half-sister, Joan Gay Croft. In 2013, there was an article by Tulsa World where a woman named Jean Smith believed that she was Joan Croft. There were similarities that Marvella said. It all can't be a coincidence. Jean Smith had a scar on her leg where a large splinter went through what I assume was the same area that Joan was injured in the tornado. The woman had a lisp, like Joan, and interestingly, she was raised by a couple where the husband's name was Olin Randall. The article said that Olin was in a mental institution and Jean's mother was in a nursing home. The article stated that the local police and the FBI told Jean Smith that she had enough evidence to prove that she was not the daughter of the people who raised her, and that the birth certificate bearing her name is not hers. And to quote, "Any time I say my name or write my name I have been using, it always felt wrong. When I use Joan Gay Croft, it feels good," Jean Smith said. There were plans to have a DNA test done once they had the money. The article stated that it would be tough, though, since Olin Croft, also spelled Olin instead of Olin, Olin had already passed. Marvella believed that at the time of the article, Jean Smith was Joan. There was never a follow-up to this, at least from what I saw, nor was Jean's age ever mentioned. I assume by the fact that Joan is still listed on NamUs that Jean was not Joan Croft. On April 12, 1993, a columnist for the Oklahoma, Robert E. Lee, yes, that was his name, Robert E. Lee, got an email from a mysterious woman who claimed to be Joan. The letter said, "Mr. Lee, I know that you have written many articles about the 1947 Woodward tornado and the missing Joan Gay Croft. How would you like to write an article about what really happened to Joan Gay and where she has been this past 45 years? She has been and is living in OKC off and on since 1956, under a different name, with the full knowledge of her father, Olin Croft. She even graduated from a OKC high school under her different name. If you want more information, please contact Joan Gay at email. Miss Joan Gay Croft." At that time, the newspaper did not have the tech to trace an email, so he wrote back asking for more information and received a reply a few weeks later. It stated, "Mr. Lee, I know this time of year there are many people who crawl out of the woodwork claiming to be the lost girl, but I was never physically lost. My immediate families know where I was. I just didn't know who I was. Until just lately, I never faced the fact that Cleta, my mother, died upon me. I buried this information deep within my long-term memory and refused to accept. If you want to know the rest, email me at email. We will arrange to meet in person to discuss the details. I propose we meet at Penn Square for the first meeting. I would like to meet in public, but not publicly, and without photos. Please let me know a time and date convenient for you. I am on the internet on most Monday, Wednesday, Friday, between 9 to 10:30 a.m. As to compensation, I would prefer none. Yours, Joan Gay Croft." Robert E. Lee attempted to make a meeting, but never heard back from this person, and eventually the email stopped receiving messages altogether. Some speculated that Robert wasn't replying to the email correctly, but I honestly believe that this person was just a scammer. It sounds a lot like one of those money schemes where you'd have to pay the person as they trickle less and less information to you. If this person really was Joan, why would they be afraid of having their picture taken? And who or what would they be hiding from? I truly believe the more I read about this case, though, that Joan may have been just one of those unidentified girls found after the tornado. There doesn't seem to be any information stating that those girls were compared to Marvella's DNA. As far as I know, the bodies haven't ever been exhumed to compare any DNA tests to. As I brought up before, the girls don't seem to be in the NamUs database. The oldest case of an unidentified person from Oklahoma on NamUs is from 1972. I just wonder if anyone has tried to compare these Jane Does to anyone, and if there'd be any possibility that that 4-year-old Jane Doe could possibly be Joan. If the 4-year-old Doe was Joan, the question comes up as to how she ended up dead. What happened to the men that took her, and how/why did she go unidentified? Various sources state that Joan's Aunt Ruth looked at the 4-year-old Jane Doe and said it wasn't her. Some speculate that Ruth said this so as not to have to pay the mortician. But news articles made it clear that the whole area was in chaos, with no power and no water in places. Many of the dead were dirty due to the debris and destruction, so I actually wonder if that's a possibility. I do wonder if Joan's family may not have been able to accept the reality that Joan had died. When it comes to the case of Little Miss X, though, I don't believe there's any way, any possibility that Joan would be her. It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense or add up in any way to me. Another person that I think we should look at would be Ida Mae Lee, who went missing from the Grand Canyon National Park, Arizona, on November 1st, 1956. At the time, she was 25 years old, and NamUs states that she may have used the last name Costello or Castillo. Ida was anywhere from 5'1" to 5'5", 110 to 120 pounds, Native American enrolled with the Navajo Nation, with brown hair and brown eyes. There doesn't seem to be any sort of description as to what she was last seen wearing. Ida was last known to be working at a hotel in November of 1956 and has not been seen since. Off the bat, a red flag goes off in my mind, since this seems way too similar to Mary Margaret Begay's case, which was only a year after Ida Mae Lee's. There have only been 7 exclusions to Ida's case, and none of them were from Arizona. There is extremely little known about this case, and some sources say the date she went missing may be listed as 1955. In the book, Navajo and Hopi Art in Arizona, Chapter 4 talks about the artist Jesse Monongahela, who was the son of Ida. Jesse was born on August 13, 1953, to Ida Mae and Preston Monongahela. When his father deployed in the military, Ida disappeared, abandoning their 4 children. Jesse was only 3 years old at the time, and the book says that 15 years ago, human remains were found in a shallow grave at the Grand Canyon, where Ida previously worked. Jesse and his siblings were raised by his maternal grandparents in the western part of the Navajo Reservation in New Mexico. Jesse got into jewelry making as an adult, learning his moral working skills and traditional stone processes from his father. His father Preston had mastered a variety of artistic processes, such as sculpture, Katsina doll carving, pottery, and jewelry. In the book, Jesse claims to have pursued jewelry making after dreaming of his mother. In the dream, a man was having a mule pull a wagon with a coffin in it. The man asked if anyone wanted to see their parents or a family member, to which Jesse did. Even through all of this, there does not seem to be much more info to Ida Mae's story. Was she taken by the same people that took Mary Begay? Wouldn't it be too outlandish to even consider the possibility that she's LMX? Considering the area, I don't think so. Another woman thought to potentially be LMX is Avis Marie Hardman. Avis was featured in the April 1956 FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin. She was born on April 20th, 1939 in Akmar, Alabama. She was 5 feet tall, 95 pounds, with curly dark brown hair, brown eyes, a tiny mole on her left cheek, a broken corner on her upper front tooth, and was 16 years old at the time that she went missing. She was last seen on March 5th, 1956, when she did not return home from Pell City High School in Ragland, Alabama. Her relative is listed as her mother, Mrs. Clarence Poe, on Route 1, Ragland, Alabama. Avis is not listed in NamUs nor the Doe Network. There are a couple of photos of her in her school's yearbooks, which, in 1955, she was a part of the freshman class. On January 23, 2001, there was a post where someone claiming to be Avis's son was looking for her. The family still lived in Alabama, though her son moved to Canada. Avis had a brother named James Hardman, who also went by the last name Duvall. James lived in Stockton, California, until his death in 1976. He's buried in Sear, California. Avis's son reportedly hadn't seen her since the 60s. On November 1st, 1999, potentially the same person stated that they were looking for Avis, who hadn't been seen since 1956. This person seems to have been an actual family member, as they refer to Avis's parents as their grandparents. Apparently, Avis hadn't been seen by any of her family members since 1956. Her parents were Floyd James Hardman and Beattie Herring. They listed Avis's birthday as September 21st, 1939. Avis liked to put peanuts in her cola. Her brother was James Melvin Hardman, who apparently had passed in Modesto, California. He was a semi-professional boxer that went under the name James Duvall. James served in the U.S. Air Force as a radio operator, also going by the nickname Buddy. A similar post from that same day pops up on Ancestry, though it seems to be virtually the same thing. I'm unsure if this person was the son of James Hardman or not, as they used his name as their username, but also stated that they lived in Modesto, California. I'm unsure of the last name differences. There doesn't seem to be any explanation as to why Avis and James had the last names Hardman. Then the FBI brochure lists her mother's last name as Poe. It's possible the mother got divorced, then married Clarence, which would explain why she was listed as the only parent on the brochure. According to Beattie's Find a Grave, she was born on September 30th, 1921. She passed away on January 2nd, 1973, and was buried in Pell City, Alabama. Her spouse, Clarence M. Poe, was born on December 21st, 1921. He passed away on June 21st, 1983, at the age of 61. He's buried at St. Clair Memorial Gardens in Pell City, Alabama, along with his wife and their daughter together, Inez. Inez Poe St. John was born on October 13th, 1946, and passed away on July 31st, 2019, at the age of 72. There doesn't seem to be any mention of Avis. In a Reddit thread, user Rambos mentioned that Avis had lots of sisters, but the link that connected this info is defunct, at least when I looked in 2023. I have to give them a lot of credit, though, because they did find a lot of info on Avis. And this interesting tidbit that she went by a different name at some point, apparently Maria Fichera. On June 7th, 2006, the user James F. Duvall Hardman posted online that he was looking for his mother. James listed his birthday as May 29th, 1957, and he was born in Stockton, California. Looking on Find a Grave, there aren't any matches close enough to the age of a Marie Fichera, and there was only one remotely close to a Marie Fichera, who was buried at Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hartford, Connecticut. She was born on March 9th, 1941, and passed away on March 15th, 2014, at the age of 73. There aren't any linked profiles, nor a description or obituary. I don't believe that this is Avis, as an obituary was easily found through Google. There does not seem to be any sort of Find a Grave page for Avis. Trying to find any info on her family on Family Search doesn't bring up anything. Looking up her son, there was indeed a James F. Duvall Hardman born on that date listed before, and aliases include James E. Lower, Justin E. Lower, and James F. Hardman. There may have been a divorce between him and a Lynn J. on December 2nd, 1982, in Sutter, California, though I'm unsure if that's him. It's impossible to find any records on Avis and her son. Looking up her mother brings more results, though, thankfully. When I looked at Beatty Herring, it says that she had a son named Clarence Anthony Poe, who was probably born in or around 1943. This record also states that his father's full name was Clarence Martin Poe. On October 27, 1962, Clarence Jr. married Sylvia May Gallops, who was 16 at the time, probably born in 1946. Her parents were Joseph Gallops and Eunice Reeves. The newlyweds married in Montgomery, Alabama. There's another record of the couple marrying again, I guess, on November 27th, 1982. Of course, on October 27th, 1963, there's a record of Inez getting married to her husband, Walter St. John. He was 21 and she was 16. I suppose that Clarence Jr. got divorced at some point because he got married to a Sally Ann Gullidge on October 29, 1976. He was 33 and she was 23. And I guess after this marriage, he went back to his first wife. Beatty had another daughter who was named Brenda Joyce Poe that was born in 1950. On July 9, 1967, Brenda married a Michael Ricardo Farrow, both being 17 years old, in Montgomery, Alabama. At some point, they got divorced, and she took on the last name Taylor. On December 3, 1976, she married a Jimmy Lee Fortner. He was 25, she was 26. Interestingly, there was no marriage record I could find on Avis. But I found info on her brother Joseph. Apparently his name was actually Joseph Marcellus Hardman, and it seems that he might have gotten married on December 29th, 1964. He married a Barbara Ann Moore, and Joseph was 23 at the time, having been born around 1941. Barbara was 21, born in 1943. Joseph's mother was Beatty, and it says that her name is listed as Beatty Allen Herring. His father was Floyd James Hardman, of course. According to Family Search, Floyd James Hardman was born on December 3rd, 1882, in Kansas. He apparently died on October 5th, 1941, making him 59 years old. This means that he died the same year Joseph was born, and 2 years after Avis was. This means So, unfortunately, the children grew up without ever knowing their father, so Clarence may have been the only father that they'd known. I'm unsure what the relationship between Avis and Clarence may have been like, but there doesn't seem to be a find grave page for Floyd or Joseph. Floyd had a whole family before his marriage to Beatty. He married a woman named Lucy J. Hardman, whose maiden name was unknown, and their marriage was on August 11th, 1903, in Montgomery, Kansas. They ended up having 4 children together. Somewhere around this time period, Floyd and his first wife Lucy broke up, and Floyd ended up meeting Beatia, or Beatty Herring, on July 21st, 1937, in Jefferson, Alabama. Avis would be born 2 years later to the couple. When Beatty was born, Floyd Hardman was 39. When they married in 1937, he was 55 years old, and she was 16. She was 18 when she had Avis, Floyd 57. Floyd was 59 when he died, and Beatty was 20 when they had their second child. On July 28, 1978, Joseph Hardman married a Debbie K. Powell, who was 22 at the time. His age is listed as 30, and that he was born in 1948, though I'm unsure if he did this on purpose. His parents are listed, though, so I know that it was him. He would have actually been 37. On December 21st, 1980, Joseph married again, this time to a Beverly June Merriman. She was 27, and his age is listed as 33. This record says he was born on 1947, but considering how 7 can look like a 1, I can see how this is more of a simple error happening. I wouldn't be surprised if he lied about his age, though. He would have been 39 by this time. Of course, the belief that Joseph had died in 1976 in California is simply not true. There's evidence of him living in Pell City, Alabama, as recently as 2008. He might even be an owner or something of some sort of golf course. Not sure what that person from that 1999 screenshot was talking about. Anyway, when searching NamUs for any old cases of missing people, though, there were just only a few women who went missing before LMX was found that I thought were relevant to the case. Mary Margaret Begay, Ida Mae Lee, and Bertha Smith. Bertha Smith went missing on June 1st, 1944, from Phoenix, Arizona. She was 31 at the time. I don't believe she may have been LMX, mostly due to her case being over a decade before LMX was ever even found. For all we know, LMX may have been a baby in 1944. The Doe Network is not much different, where the oldest missing case from Arizona is from 1928, which was Bessie Louise Hyde, who went missing on November 15th, 1928. She was 23 years old at the time. Once again, I just don't think that she would be LMX either, since Bessie would have been in her 50s by the time LMX was actually even found. There are a few other girls on NamUs that I think could be potential matches. These are just all my speculation, which is just a result of looking through the NamUs website. The oldest of these cases is that of Beverly Rose Potts. I mostly looked at her as a potential match for LMX due to the height and age listed from when she went missing. Beverly Rose Potts went missing on August 24th, 1951 from Cleveland, Ohio. At the time of her disappearance, she was 10 years old, 4'11", and 90 pounds. Beverly is listed as white, with strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes. The NamUs profile states that she went missing at a neighborhood festival at Halloran Park. There were no witnesses and no traces of what happened to her. Next is the case of Beverly Catherine Mastny, who went missing on September 21st, 1953, from Broadview Heights, Ohio. At the time of her disappearance, she was 15 years old, 5'7", with strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes. Nothing else seems to be found or noted on the NamUs profile. Last is Carol Ann Batterman, who went missing on May 31st, 1958, from Oklahoma City / the Moore area of Oklahoma. At the time that she went missing, she was 19 years old, 5'5", 115 pounds, with brown-haired brown eyes. Carol had long brown hair that was usually worn loose, with an olive complexion. She had freckles on her nose and forehead. NamUs states that she was last seen in front of Crown Motel, waiting for a bus. She was last seen, or last known, wearing a beige-colored suit with high heels and a small white purse that contained about $35. She had a wedding band with engraved stars on the inside, and it stated DB to CH 51758, with a class ring on her right hand, which was yellow with a black stone. Class of 1956, PTHS, Proviso Township High School. While each girl has their similarities with LMX, there's contrasts that, of course, can prevent each of one from being her also. The biggest one that comes to mind really is the age difference between most of these women from this time period and the estimated age of LMX. Some of these women are 10 plus years older than LMX, though it should be remembered that LMX was found before modern DNA testing. If we can find her remains somehow, I would be very curious to see what more accurate results would say about who she is. There were reports of authorities trying to locate her body right before the pandemic of 2020, though I don't know whatever happened with that. Though Little Miss X is in the NamUs database, I don't believe we have any DNA to compare to. Now, typically, if something is in NamUs, you would assume there's DNA, but in this case in particular, I truly don't know. I still assume we haven't found her body yet. So, now what? If we can't find anyone else similar enough in the state of Arizona, where can we look? We can look all over the U.S. for girls that may have been missing within the past year that LMX was found. Or we could look through newspapers that may have talked about LMX's remains being discovered. But it's all still just a shot in the dark. I believe that we can look up missing person cases all day, but until there's DNA to compare it to, we'll never be able to figure out who LMX was.